Yes, hello and welcome to another action-packed episode of Play On, the Scottish Football Show. Stick with us for the next hour as we bring you another episode of all things Scottish football here on the Play On Scottish Football Show. I'm David Simmons, and as always, delighted to be joined by Stephen Commons and Anthony Brown. Stay tuned as we look back on the weekend's Scottish football in action, highlights and the key talking points which have been happening this weekend. On tonight's show, we're discussing the Loyal Rumble. Rangers fans bring shame to the club after disgraceful celebrations in Glasgow this weekend. But why? We're going to be discussing that as our main talking point. But like every week, we are fully live and interactive. We want to hear from you guys, so drop us a message with your views on anything that we're discussing on tonight's show. And don't forget as well, if you're watching via YouTube, please subscribe to the State of Mind YouTube channel and get on over to Twitter and follow the Play On Scottish Football Show. Okay, so guys, we're going to start right in the key talking point. It's all over the tabloids, it's on all the news outlets, we've seen it on social media. Police Scotland has said that many more arrests will follow in what they described as disgraceful scenes as Rangers fans celebrated in Glasgow city centre. 5 police officers were injured, 28 people were arrested as crowds were dispersed due to rising disorder. Thousands of fans had taken to the streets after Rangers' first Scottish Premiership title win in a decade. They marched from Ibrox Stadium to George Square on Saturday, where flares were sent off and missiles were thrown. I mean, Stephen, I'm going to stick with you. In this current climate, any large-scale celebrations were obviously going to be hard to condone on any level. Still in level 3, I think it is. But I mean, going by the footage that's doing the rounds on social media, that's on the news outlets, if you like. I mean, that's no way for any human being to behave. Never mind to try and celebrate, is it?
I think you need to take the pandemic thing even out of the equation. I mean, even if this was just a normal Saturday or Sunday afternoon, Saturday afternoon, it's bizarre behaviour, like ridiculous. I mean, I'll put my hand up quite openly and say that when Rangers officially won the title against St Mirren, I wouldn't say I gave them a pass. I think we had to kind of look at it as a whole, and I was one of the ones that said, listen, these guys have been up against it as a fan group for 9 years. They've had it kind of rubbed in their face. They've lived every single day of that 9 years. And it's just like a pressure cooker and the lids come off. There is absolutely no excuse. There is nothing that anybody can say that can convince me that Saturday's scenes were acceptable in any way, shape or form. I don't know. I mean, we've had fan groups in the past that have maybe overstepped the mark. You look back at the Scotland fans that broke the crossbar at Wembley. You've got to look at the Hibs fans who, since 1902, they won the Scottish Cup. Their fans invaded the pitch, and it was just like an outpouring of emotion. But the scenes that we saw on Saturday were premeditated. This is a club who supposedly were winning their 55th title, and yeah, I get there's a big gap, and they've kind of been to hell and back, but I've never seen a group of supporters who, in such large quantities, turn on each other. Like, I've been on many European trips and away days with Hearts that there's quite often wee skirmishes and fans fighting with each other, and especially when drink's involved. But to see it on such a large scale in the centre of one of the most metropolitan cities in Europe, it's sickening, to be perfectly honest. And that, as I say, there is no excuse. There's nothing that you can say or do that's going to kind of make the scenes that we saw any better or any less shocking. But I just think that some of these grown men, I mean, I understand a lot of them were maybe younger guys and stuff, but they're grown men and women, and they're behaving in ways that you just wouldn't expect. You wouldn't expect animals or children to behave that way. It's put a bit of a damp squib on what could have been an amazing, what is on paper still football-wise an amazing season for Rangers. But as a club, if I was Steven Gerrard and you've got a guy who's won what he's won and done what he's done in the game, and you've got to say a bit of class about Gerrard. I think everybody can sort of see that. I think he must be sitting looking at that and thinking, wow, like he's probably from a bit of a rough and ready part of Liverpool, but I guarantee he's probably never seen scenes like that. It's beyond words, to be honest, Simon.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we do pride ourselves on this show as being level opinionated, if you like. We discussed quite in depth when Celtic went to Dubai. We've discussed when Celtic fans turned up at Parkhead. I mean, you've openly spoke about how, being a Hearts fan, you think Hibs are going to win the Scottish Cup this year. You're right in what you say, Stephen. We should be discussing on this show the highlights of Rangers' season, how they have turned things around and lifted the league trophy after such a long time out. But the fans have kind of brought this on themselves, and it's a key talking point on tonight's show. Police broke up crowds after about 5 hours due to rising disorder, with one officer suffering serious facial injuries. The scenes reminded me of English fans, to be honest, Anthony. You know, when they go to a major tournament and you see them trying to take on the Russians, and they get involved in France. I remember the water cannon scenes. I mean, that's not what Scottish football's about, mate, is it? That's not what we stand for.
No, I mean, I can't remember seeing anything like this in Scottish football. I mean, the only comparable scenes I can remember involving a Scottish team was Rangers in Manchester 13 years ago. And it's like, yeah, as Stephen touched on, I think certainly me and Stephen gave the Rangers fans the benefit of the doubt the day they won the title and they all converged outside Ibrox, because that was just almost a sort of sporadic outpouring of emotion because they'd won the league. Yes, they probably... Of course, they shouldn't have met because of the pandemic sort of situation, but generally it seemed to be, excuse me if I'm wrong, but I didn't see any sort of sinister videos from that weekend. It was all relatively calm and not civilised, but you know what I mean? There was no real unedifying behaviour in the same way as what we saw at the weekend, but the weekend there was just absolutely disgusting. Like, you touch on England fans going abroad, and yes, they cause bother, and I'm not excusing what they do in any way, but in a way, they're organised casuals that go out and fight with opposition fans. Here you had just folk absolutely fighting among themselves. I mean, it was just like animal behaviour. It was, I don't know how, I don't think any decent-minded Rangers fan would try and condone that on any level. I don't think any decent-minded football fan could try and condone it, because it was, football fans converge. As Stephen touched on, occasionally you get the odd flare-up between people who've had too much to drink, but this was just... I've seen the terminology a minority, and maybe in the grand scheme of Rangers fans, in the sense that they've got 45, 50,000 season ticket holders, it could be termed a minority, but it was still a significant amount of people causing disorder. It wasn't just a few dozen here and there. It was hundreds, possibly even thousands, that were behaving like absolute vermin. I mean, there's no defence for the way they behaved at the weekend. There's no playing it down as fans getting a little bit carried away in their moment of glory. It was just scumbag behaviour on every level. I mean, I'm not saying everybody who met in Glasgow was there to cause trouble. Of course they weren't. There were obviously people who turned up just there trying to have a good time, and that's another debate whether they should have been doing that during the current situation, obviously, because obviously Glasgow's remaining in level 3, so you then have to question, should anybody have gathered? But beyond that, the uncivilised scenes, the unrest, the fighting with police, all the songs that we've seen, I mean, it just seems like social media this weekend has been a cesspit of horrible behaviour, and there's no defence for it, to be honest. As you sort of touch on there, we always try and see both sides of every situation, but I don't think there is a both sides in this one. It's just a significant amount of people behaving like absolute animals.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I was even on social media earlier, there was certain Rangers fans trying to justify urinating in public because the public toilets were shut, so they had nowhere else to go. But you should not have been there in the first place. Like you say, we're going through a pandemic at the moment, the bigger scale of things. We're in level 3. I mean, we should be thankful that football even returned. Never mind going out and celebrating the title win. I mean, to be honest, guys, we can't even sit, well, we probably can now after the level 2 announcement in our area, but we can't sit in the same room and do this show because of the ongoing pandemic in the background. Never mind meeting and gathering, and yes, thousands. There's some people that's maybe on the comments tonight saying, what do you mean by thousands? There was literally thousands of people out there celebrating when they probably should have been doing it a bit more respectfully. But not to worry, it's done and dusted hopefully now, and we don't see scenes like that again. Rangers have responded to the scenes at the weekend, saying sadly a small minority of people behaved inappropriately and in a manner not reflective of our support. Some of the scenes were unacceptable and have been besmirched the good name of Rangers Football Club. These so-called fans should reflect upon their values and their ethos of the club and consider the damage this does to the reputation of the club. At 5pm this evening, the Scotsman newspaper released a story, saying that Police Scotland investigate a video now that has now gone viral, which is to do with Rangers staff and Rangers players. So they're investigating that video which allegedly shows players and staff using sectarian language during the SPFL title celebrations. Police are investigating claims that Rangers FC players used sectarian language during their title celebrations at the weekend. It just goes from bad from worse, doesn't it, Stephen, really?
Yeah, I think we need to be very careful about really commenting pretty heavily on the video that is in question, because
there is rumours obviously that the sound and everything has been dubbed, so it is an alleged.
Rangers official statement have released an official statement saying that they've looked at it. It's not reflective of what was happening at that scene. The players were jumping about and celebrating and singing songs and dancing, but what they said was that they're a multicultural, multiracial dressing room. They wouldn't, as a club, stand up, like they wouldn't allow songs to be sung about Catholics or which I don't know if that's true or not. I'm not part of the Rangers dressing room. I would like to think that the days of Rangers players in the dressing room singing "Follow, Follow" and all the sectarian songs that used to be sung in the sort of, I don't know, the Davy Dodds, the Ali McCoist days, and they used to always get the 12th of July off. I think those days are gone for Rangers as a club. I think they look to move away from that as much as they can. I believe that there are a number of Catholic players within the dressing room. There is probably a number of Catholics that are hired in terms of the staff. I don't believe that song would be sung, but stranger things have happened. There are people that can get caught up in moments, and it may have been, even if it was just one or two of the players, that's still unacceptable. So I think we need to be careful in terms of allowing the police to do their due diligence, to look at it and find out if the what we're seeing in the video matched up to the sound, in terms of, as somebody dubbed sectarian singing over the celebrations, or was that what was actually being sung? And until that time, I don't really think we can judge one way or another. I mean, you're right in what you're saying. It's just another. It's like what was happening to Celtic earlier in the season, but obviously in a much less controversial way. Celtic just seemed to have one thing going wrong, and then as they were coming to the end of that one thing and maybe try to get that right, another thing came wrong, and every single time they tried to get on their feet, their feet kept getting swept away from them. This is what could potentially happen to Rangers if these things turn out to be true, and obviously on the back of what's happened with the fans. And don't get me wrong, in the same way that Celtic as a football club were not responsible for those fans turning up to the stadium earlier in the year, which we were quite openly, we went against that. I think you have to say the same thing for Rangers. Rangers put out a statement before the game. They made a public announcement after the game and said, can you please disperse away from this area? But all that actually did was funneled them from Ibrox into George Square. So I'm not really too sure how much more Rangers could have done prior to it, but I think Rangers as a club really need to address what's going on in their actual support, and look at that and say, right, is there something more that we could be doing to try and move away from these dark days of the past and the sort of level of singing that and the songs that were being sung. I mean, when the First Minister's commenting on that, you've made headlines in all the wrong ways.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for all the comments that's coming in. Obviously, there's a few that we can't actually put on the screen, but I did see one there. Hi to this person who's been in touch saying, I'm a Rangers fan and I'm disgusted with the vile behaviour, and I kind of agree with that as well. Stephen, I mean, you touched on it there, Anthony, Stephen touched on it. The First Minister, when she has to get involved, you do know that things are getting a bit serious now. Obviously, we're going through this pandemic. Glasgow remains in level 3. How do you think the fans should have celebrated that title when lifting the trophy?
Well, if you're following the rules, you should have stayed in your home area and celebrated. I don't know what the rules are at the moment in terms of specifics, but in your garden with a couple of other Rangers fans, perhaps. I don't know. I mean, it's not an ideal situation, but the Hibs fans are going to have, or Hibs or St Johnstone are going to have the same issue this weekend in terms of if they win the cup. They're going to have to show a little bit of restraint in terms of keeping themselves away from what would be the normal routine of celebrating a victory. I mean, St Johnstone could find themselves winning 2 cups in the middle of a pandemic, which is it's a great situation, but a horrible situation at the same time, because they're not going to get that big gathering in Perth, the open top bus and all that you associate with cup wins. But I think generally speaking, we've seen a decent level of restraint across the board. Yeah, I get obviously there's always going to be situations where a certain number of fans from any club will gather in these situations. It's human nature that you're always going to get people that push the boundaries a little bit. So, I mean, I don't think anybody expected that every Rangers fan was going to stay at home at the weekend or stay in their own communities. There was always the likelihood of a gathering like this. But I think it's gone beyond just discussing whether Rangers fans should have turned up in the middle of a pandemic. It's gone beyond like the behaviour has taken it to another level. It's just the behaviour's been toxic throughout the weekend. And to be honest, you touched on the statement there. I think Rangers put out a statement earlier on regarding what happened over the weekend, and I thought it was a really poor statement, really wishy-washy, and I thought it was pretty pathetic that it started with they came out with this stuff about the 55th title win and stressing that it was their 150th year. There was no need for that in that particular statement. Yes, you can go for all these little pot shots at Celtic and what have you and defending your club in normal circumstances, but when a significant section of your fan base has behaved like that over the weekend, why open with that line about 55 titles and 150 years and what have you? Just go straight in and condemn the behaviour. Just say we are absolutely disgusted by the way a significant element of our supporters behaved in the city centre over the weekend.
Tony, what you've said there absolutely sums up the biggest issue. Well, I mean, one of the biggest issues we've got in Scottish football is that Rangers and Celtic are so prideful, and I'm talking as someone who does not have a dog in the fight here. I'm a complete outsider. I support a club who does not have any affiliation with Rangers or Celtic, right? You look at the biggest issue that we have is see when something like this goes wrong, instead of just putting their hands up, and by the way, I'm talking about the club, the supporters, everybody, from an official capacity to an unofficial capacity. They are too busy trying to point a finger at Celtic for things that they've done wrong, maybe in the past, or things that are currently going wrong at the club. They're too busy doing that than actually just addressing what's wrong and what's happening at their club. See if these two clubs, there's such giant football clubs in European terms and especially in Scottish terms, if they actually just took just a tiny bit more responsibility for their own actions in terms of, see, instead of pointing fingers at each other all the time, try and internalise it and have a look at your own club and say, what are we doing wrong? And I understand the sort of whataboutery is what Scottish football has kind of come to be over the last couple of years or the last couple of decades. But I just think, see, as clubs, you're spot on. If Rangers' statement had come out and just said, like, nothing about trying to goad Celtic, nothing about Celtic at all. Celtic were not involved in this whatsoever. So just do not even mention anything about winning titles. What happened at the weekend has nothing to do with Rangers' success or otherwise. It's the actions of some individuals who should be absolutely just looked upon as the scum that they are. And Rangers should have come out and strongly stated that and said anybody who's acting in this way is not welcome back at Ibrox. And you would have got so much more credit in the bank from every other football fan in Scotland. And probably they would never admit it, but from the other side of the city as well. I think Celtic fans would have looked at that and thought, okay, what, fair play. They've actually come out and they've gone to town on their own fans, quite rightly so. But they will never ever do that. They'll never, because it's always about what the other team have done or what the other team are failing to do.
Yeah, I mean, well, this all comes after Rangers swept aside Aberdeen at the weekend. They did go the whole season undefeated. We said that it looked like they were going to do it. Stephen Gerrard's side are the first to go unbeaten since Brendan Rodgers' Celtic side in 2016-2017 season. They also matched their city rivals' 107-year-old clean sheet record. I mean, love them or hate them. I mean, fans aside, the animosity, the shambolic behaviour that we did see at the weekend, what Rangers have achieved on the park this season has been pretty remarkable, Anthony. You do have to give them credit for that, don't you?
Yeah, I think we have every weekend, and that's what we should have been headlining on today. Rangers complete domestic unbeaten season in the league, and that's what should have been our headline today. But instead, it's obviously all the negative stuff because that's just overridden everything that's happened on the pitch at the weekend. But yeah, I mean, in terms of what Rangers have done this season, there'll be an element of disappointment about the two cup competitions, but in the league they've been pretty much flawless, as evidenced by the fact they haven't lost a game. And I remember you asking me maybe November time, December time, can Rangers go the season unbeaten? And I was like, I couldn't entertain that thought at that time. I just thought there's no way this Rangers team will go unbeaten. I wasn't even convinced to win the league at that point. And the fact we were even talking about that in December time really surprised me, but fair play to them. They've absolutely demolished the league. And you find often when teams get to a point where they win the league with a month to spare or 6 weeks to spare or whatever it was when Rangers eventually did it, that they take their foot off the gas and maybe they'll get turned over by a team that they shouldn't lose to in the closing weeks of the season. And to Rangers' credit, they've not done that. They've kept going, and beating Aberdeen 4-0 on the last day of the season in a game that has nothing at stake. I mean, that just shows that they've maintained their focus right to the end in terms of the league campaign. And in terms of the football side of it, they absolutely deserve all the plaudits they get for this season. They've been absolutely brilliant. Steven Gerrard has done an absolutely sensational job in terms of turning the club, not just turning the club around, but getting them to a point where they can match Celtic and then overtake Celtic. And just to be in a position to capitalise on Celtic having a very bad season, I think everybody at Rangers deserves maximum credit for that. It's been a sensational season in a football in the football, on the football side of it, and in Europe as well. They had a really good run in Europe. So, yeah, overall, I mean, they will look at the two cup competitions as ones that got away because they lost to St Mirren and St Johnstone, two clubs that they've proved over the course of the season that they're vastly superior to. So there will be a disappointment there. But I think over the course, if you'd said to a Rangers fan at the start of the season, you'll win the league at an absolute canter without losing a game, you'll have a decent run in Europe, fair enough, you won't do particularly well in the cup competitions, I think every Rangers fan would have taken that scenario. It's been a fantastic season for them overall.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, obviously, the other key talking points on the field this weekend was the battle at the bottom. We're going to start at New Douglas Park. It was Hamilton Accies 0, Kilmarnock 2. Stephen's made his opinions quite clear on every show this season, if you like, that Hamilton Accies were the one that you wanted to see go down, and we now know it's confirmed that Hamilton will not be playing in the top flight of Scottish football next season. But Kilmarnock's Scottish Premiership survival now rests on a playoff against Dundee despite a comfortable final day victory against Hamilton Accies, confirming their host inevitable relegation. Now the Ayrshire side looked to be heading for safety at half time after Mitch Pincock's first half double. And with Motherwell leading at Ross County, it looked like Kilmarnock were going to be safe, but the Dingwall side turned things around and only having to get 1 point. Yogi Hughes done it. The question is, though, can Killie survive, Stephen? Do you think they'll stay up, or are we looking at a double plastic pitch relegation?
It's so tough to call that game because I don't necessarily. I mean, this might sound ridiculous. I don't necessarily think Killie are in that bad a form, to be honest. I mean, they even won at the weekend, so they will probably still be going into that. It's not like they've lost 5 or 6 in a row and they've just spiralled into that position. I mean, the one example that I always go back to is, and I know people will go, he's only bringing this up because he's a Hearts fan, but when Hibs got relegated from that position in terms of the playoff position, their form after Christmas just absolutely nosedived. They could not buy a win. They couldn't get in it. And it went into that game, and even after winning away at Hamilton still came back and beat them at Easter Road, and that was the end of that. They went out on penalties. I just think that Kilmarnock are in a different situation to that. They have had maybe patchy form in the second half of the season since the new manager came in, but I still think that they won't be going into that completely down on their luck and feeling like they're victims there. I think Dundee are probably the opposite to that. They obviously had a really poor start to the season, and then since maybe, I don't know, January or February have really kicked on and got quite they've amassed quite a bit of like their points difference back. So it's a really tough game to call, and I think my money's still going to be on Killie. I would love to see the 2 plastic pitches go down. I think we've discussed that at length. The 2 plastic pitches have no place in the top tier of Scottish football, but I think Killie will beat Dundee over 2 legs.
Well, it did look like at one stage, Anthony, that Killie might have saved himself because Ross County were 1-0 down to Motherwell, but it did finish at Fir Park. Motherwell 1, Ross County 2. Manager John Hughes says that the football gods shined on Ross County as they secured their place in the Scottish Premiership with a win over Motherwell. They were trailing early, like I said, but goals from Ian Vigurs and Michael Gardine ensured the Dingwall men finished in 10th place. I mean, Yogi Hughes, he was brought in to do one job and one job only. I mean, it's mission accomplished for Agent Hughes then, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think when Tommy Wright was appointed Kilmarnock manager, I think we all thought that Tommy Wright would get Kilmarnock safe, and by that I mean out of the bottom 2 positions. With that happening, you would have expected that, I suppose, Hamilton and Ross County would be the 2 teams in the bottom 2 if that was going to be the case. So John Hughes is probably not necessarily exceeded expectations, but he's certainly done his job in terms of, he's done a really good job in that period in terms of getting Ross County out of the bottom two. I know they needed till the last day of the season to do it, but if you'd asked me 3 or 4 weeks ago who's going to finish in the bottom two, I'd have been more inclined to say that Kilmarnock will get themselves safe and Ross County will be the team that finish in the bottom two. So in that regard, it's been an excellent, not necessarily a turnaround, because I don't think Ross County have been sensational by any stretch, but a good job in terms of just doing enough to get them above water. And it's not been a season where one team's been cast adrift and cut loose. So it's not been an easy year to avoid relegation. It's been very much a scrap of who can sort of dig in and just accumulate the most points over the course of the last few months. And as Stephen says, Kilmarnock have actually been in pretty decent form. Probably the thing that let Kilmarnock down was they didn't get the immediate new manager bounce that I think we expected to get when Tommy Wright went in there. I think if I remember rightly, it took 3 or 4 games before he got his first win, maybe even longer than that. I think if they'd hit form a little bit earlier, they would have got out of it and they'd have got away to safety. But they just left it too late. And when they did start winning games, they weren't able to continue winning right through. There was a few bad, they got turned over by Dundee United, if I remember right, a few weeks back. And they just never quite generated enough consistency. And when Kyle Lafferty got injured, that seemed to knock the wind out their sails a little bit for those couple of games. So going into the playoff, I mean, yeah, I think the thing about this, if Kilmarnock were playing Raith Rovers, for instance, I would strongly fancy Kilmarnock because I think there's a gulf in overall quality. I know Raith Rovers have had an excellent season, play fantastic football, but in terms of calibre of player, I think Raith Rovers aren't quite at the same level as Dundee. I think the fact it's Dundee Kilmarnock are playing player for player, there's probably not a massive difference in the teams. If you look through, Dundee have got pedigree players in there. Jason Cummings, for me, is still a high-end Scottish Premiership calibre striker. Charlie Adam could comfortably play in the Scottish Premiership. I know he's not got any pace, but he could still comfortably play probably in a top 6 team in the Premiership and do a job. So Dundee and Paul McGowan's a seasoned player, could comfortably play in the Premiership. There's lots of them at Dundee, even Fontaine. They are a team that will, if you look at player for player, they're not vastly inferior, if inferior at all, to Kilmarnock. So I think it's a very hard game to call. You obviously give Kilmarnock the edge just because they're used to playing against Premiership teams. They're sharpened in that regard, whereas Dundee generally have been playing against lower calibre teams throughout the season. But I think we saw when Dundee faced Hearts at Dens Park, they outplayed Hearts, if I remember rightly, back in January. And they've generally done well against the sort of stronger teams in the division over the past few months. And I think the fact they were able to go to Raith Rovers with the pressure on and win 3-0, I think that says a lot about where they are at the moment in terms of confidence and quality. So would it be a shock if Dundee were to beat Kilmarnock over the 2 legs? No. But equally, would it be a shock if Kyle Lafferty turns up, bangs in a hat-trick, Kilmarnock win the first game 3-0? No, it wouldn't. I just, again, very much like the cup final, I find it very hard to call this one.
Yeah, no, and it should be a good one. Look forward to it. Motherwell, even though they did get beat by Ross County the weekend, they finished the season in 8th place after being leapfrogged on the final day by St Mirren. Now, the Steelmen, Stephen, they were once in a relegation battle at one stage in the season. I actually quite look forward to seeing Graham Alexander next season and what he can do with a pre-season under his belt. Would you agree that he might be one to watch?
Yeah, I think so. I was actually, just when Tony was talking there, I was sitting thinking about this. Like, if Killie and Ross County had both got the manager bounce, right, you would be looking at that and thinking, right, so what other poor teams are there in that sort of bottom 6? You look at it, you look at the teams that are there. I mean, out with Hamilton, I mean, fair play to them. They actually took it to, like, technically the last day with the squad of players they had. That's an absolute miracle. But if you look at the other teams, all the other teams have got really good squads, really good managers. It's actually got the makings of an unbelievable league again next season. Like, if you look at all the teams that are in and around that area, they're all pretty much like, you could make a case for Dundee United breaking into the top 4 or 5. You could make a case for Motherwell doing the same thing, exactly what you've just said. And you wouldn't put it past somebody like Killie. If Killie stay up, they could get a bounce off of Tommy Wright, and Tommy Wright could go and find these wee gems that he used to get at St Johnstone, and they could go flying as well. So, I mean, Motherwell are one of a number of teams, I think, who have got the potential. But I think what Graham Alexander's done there since he's come in is pretty good. It's pretty impressive because he's come in there and he took a little while to maybe adjust the system, look at some players in different positions, and And the thing that he's got that might work against him is that probably his two best players on paper, you've got Alan Campbell and Declan Gallagher. He's going to lose both of them. I mean, Declan Gallagher's already signed for Aberdeen. Alan Campbell is going to go. They'll get a development fee for him. One thing I'd like to point out, just a completely off topic, but about Motherwell, is that I just want to give them a massive, massive credit for what they did last week in terms of their season ticket holders. They put an announcement out to basically say, anyone who bought a season ticket last year, we're not going to bother doing any sales for this year for you guys. It just rolls over. You don't have to pay again. Anybody who chooses to pay again, so if people say, that's a really great gesture from the club, thanks very much, but I'm still in a financial position where I want to do that, they will accept the people's money and they will put that towards another ticket, which will be given to a low-income family in the Motherwell area. And I just think you need to give credit where credit's due, because that is a club who are absolutely 100% hand in hand with their fan base. And I just think that there isn't enough credit. I mean, we're quick enough to jump on teams, especially the likes of Celtic and Hearts, who have failed to listen to their fans at numerous times this season. But see, when a club like that are conducting themselves the way that they are, I think you need to give massive credit to Motherwell.
No, absolutely. That's an amazing gesture. Anthony, it'd be good to see more clubs follow suit and do similar things, isn't it?
It would be, but I think, in fairness, it will boil down to whether the clubs can actually afford to do that. I wouldn't necessarily begrudge clubs not doing it, because some of the clubs are going to have their backs against the wall financially because of the situation over the past 14 months and the fact that there isn't clarity yet about whether they're actually going to be allowed in at start of next season. So, I mean, I wouldn't blame any club for not doing it, but if they are in a position to do it like Motherwell are, then yes, absolutely brilliant gesture if they are able to do that. But I wouldn't be putting pressure on clubs to do it, because we don't know the finances of every club and how close they are to the wind, if you like, in terms of running out of cash and being in financial jeopardy.
Yeah, I mean, sticking with you, Anthony, I mean, I discussed there that defeat for Motherwell meant that St Mirren leapfrogged them, and St Mirren manager Jim Goodwin is delighted with the highest Scottish top flight finish in 32 years for the Paisley club. Their side finished in 7th on goal difference, the same feat achieved under a Tony Fitzpatrick in 1988-89 season after the 0-0 draw with Dundee United at the weekend. I mean, Anthony, we've always kind of backed Jim Goodwin, haven't we? He just seems a likeable guy, and he's obviously... I mean, it's the highest finish in 32 years. He's obviously getting a tune out of that St Mirren squad, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, over the course of this season, Jim Goodwin's done a really good job. He got them to the semi-finals of the League Cup, and obviously he's got them a relatively decent league finish. I think that would be couched by the fact that there will be an element of St Mirren fans thinking what could have been in terms of how close they were. I mean, they were, 5-10 minutes away from the top six. So there will be an aspect of regret that they weren't able to push in and get there. But I think equally you have to remember the sort of chaos they were having to deal with at the start of the season with all the COVID, the way that affected them. They were probably the worst hit club in the early part of the season in terms of losing players, fixtures getting postponed and what have you. So in that regard, they've done really well to turn it around and get themselves into a position where they could push for the top six. But I mean, we've spoken about this already. I find it astonishing a club like St Mirren, who have been in the Premiership for such a... Obviously, it's not been an unbroken spell in the Premiership, but generally they've been in the Premiership more often than not over the past 20, 30 years. I find it really odd that they've not been able to make the top six when you see other clubs like Kilmarnock, St Johnstone, Motherwell, even Partick, who you would argue are very similar in terms of stature, and St Mirren just haven't been able to make it into the top six. So I guess if they keep Jim Goodwin and they can build on what they've done this year, they will feel they've got a decent chance. But equally, as Stephen said, it's made all the harder by the fact that most of the teams in the Premiership at the moment seem to have their house in order and are in reasonably decent nick. I mean, going off on a tangent, a lot of people have dismissed Hibs finishing third, particularly Hibs fans. Some Hibs fans have been a wee bit sort of dismissive of the fact they've finished third on the basis that supposedly this has been a poor league campaign in general, that the Premiership's not as strong as it usually is. I would argue otherwise. I mean, I know Aberdeen have dropped off a bit and Celtic have obviously dropped off. Those two teams undoubtedly are not as strong as they have been for much of the past decade. Obviously, there's no Hearts there, so that's another factor. So I can see when you put those three things together why people might argue that the league is not as strong as it usually is. But I think that can be sort of offset by the fact St Johnstone have been right at it. Motherwell, yes, they had a bad start, but they've come on strong and they've been a team that have proved themselves capable of beating pretty much anybody in the league in the latter part of the season. St Mirren have been perfectly capable of picking up points.
Livy went through
Livingston were flying for a period. So as much as what you would maybe call the bigger clubs haven't quite hit the heights in terms of Celtic, Aberdeen, and obviously Hearts not being there, I think that's offset by the fact that the supposed smaller clubs have actually probably all performed to a reasonable standard. Yes, they've not all been pushing top six, but even Dundee United coming up into the league, they were in sort of mid-table for most of the season. They were competitive, perfectly capable of winning a match on their day. So it's not like Hibs have been playing cannon fodder every week. And I know Hibs have generally been pretty consistent against the teams in the bottom six, but none of those teams have been hapless. They've not been easy teams to play against, easy teams to pick up 3 points against. So overall, I think the league has been of a decent standard this year. And I think, as Stephen touched on, if Hearts come up and if Kilmarnock get their house in order, or if Dundee come up and are able to retain the likes of Cummings and Adam and add a few more bits of quality, then I think you will find that the Premiership is even stronger next year. And you would hope that Aberdeen and Celtic both come back that bit stronger than what they were last year in terms of strengthening the overall product.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, we'll come to the Hibs Celtic game in just a second. As we're talking to St Mirren, Dundee United 0-0. Stephen, Dundee United, they finished the campaign in 9th place. Do you think the fans would have been expecting a higher place finish, or would that be exactly where they seen themselves?
I think the fans, fans are fans. I think fans would have been looking at it and saying, oh, we'll be top six, or we'll be doing this. But I think if you had sat down with Mickey Mellon at the start of the season, I think you looked at, at one point of the season, the owner was going and asking fans for money to keep the club running for periods. They looked like they were in real financial trouble at one point. So I think if you put all those things together, first season back in the Premier League, a guy who, although is very experienced as a manager, had never managed in the Scottish top flight, I just think you put all that together, it's been a good season for them. And I know that Dundee United fans might look at that and go, no, we should be better, we should be higher. It's exactly the same situation as Hearts next year. Hearts fans, en masse, will be expecting Hearts to go and be third, or be competing for third with Hibs, Aberdeen. To me, I think, and I don't think many Hearts fans will agree with me on this, but I think if Hearts can go and get even a top six finish next season, it gives you a platform to build on. I think you try and do too much too soon, sometimes it can fly back in your face. If you look at teams like Fulham in the English Premiership, came up for the Championship, spent 100 million on players a few years back, and then were sent packing straight back down again. So I think you sometimes you just need to find your feet and get your place in the league, and then when you've got that structure to build from, go. And I think if Dundee United financially are okay and they can kind of push through this period of time, I think they've got the makings of a pretty reasonable squad. If they can retain Shankland, or if they sell Shankland and get some decent money, and maybe go out and get a few bodies in to kind of put in and around him, I think they've got the makings of a pretty strong squad. Honestly, I know I keep going back to this point, but I don't really see a weak link in that Premier Division next season. Like I think it's going to be a really, really strong league, and I think it wouldn't surprise me if you found a Hearts or a Hibs, maybe not Hibs. I think Hibs are maybe a wee bit too good for it, but maybe a Hearts or an Aberdeen or a Motherwell or Dundee United who would really struggle next year. I just think that it's going to be that competitive that there's not going to be any whipping boys in that league, from what I can see. I might be completely wrong, and somebody might end up with the worst points tally in history, but I just don't, looking at it now and what the squads are and what you would probably think they're going to be moving forward, I just don't really see any massive weak links in that squad, in the table.
Yeah, obviously, if Dundee are successful against Kilmarnock, then it brings a Dundee derby along with it. And I did see a comment here which made a good point. Swapping Hearts and Dundee for Kelly and Hamilton will be a huge upgrade on the top flight. I have to kind of agree with that. Dundee are successful, like I say, you got the Dundee derby, and Hearts instead of Hamilton, well, There we go, you get Hearts and Hibs, don't you? If we move on to Hibs, on Saturday it was their last game and it finished 0-0 against Celtic at Easter Road. Celtic were unable to make their dominance pay as they finished their Scottish Premiership campaign with a goalless draw away against Hibernian. And what likely was to be John Kennedy's final game in charge, Celtic suffered a frustrating 90 minutes. Instead, Hibs completed the season unbeaten at home to Celtic, the first time they have done so since their return to the Premiership. They now prepare for next week's Scottish Cup final with St Johnstone. A few things just to take from that, because it was probably, well, it's not probably, it was Scott Brown's final game for Celtic. First of all, Anthony, how will John Kennedy be remembered for his time at Celtic?
As manager, or
just in general? Because I mean, obviously, it was his time as a player. He was hampered by injury. Well, he received that horrible injury which ended his playing career. He then moved into coaching. From sort of that stage onwards, I mean, he was backroom staff for a pretty successful era.
Yeah,
at
I mean,
Celtic.
I think overall, when the dust settles, I think John Kennedy will always be welcome at Celtic Park. He's been there for such a long period as player, as coach, as now caretaker manager. I don't think any Celtic fans will wish him any bad luck in the future or anything. I think they'll all want to see him kick on and go and be a good manager somewhere else. But I don't think there's any Celtic fan in the universe at the moment who would want John Kennedy to stay as manager. That's no slight on John Kennedy in terms of anything he may have done. It's just the fact that he's not the big name they're looking for. He's not got the experience. He's not got the sort of gravitas, the pedigree that they'll be looking for in the next manager. And to be honest, he's not pulled up any trees during his time as caretaker manager. I think that's probably the most important part. I mean, I'm not a big advocate of giving a manager a job on the basis of good work as a caretaker, but I don't think having said that, I don't think we've seen any evidence that there would be a major upturn if John Kennedy was to become a Celtic manager. So I don't think anybody will be sad to see the back of him in his caretaker capacity. Whether he stays on at the club or not, I don't know. That's obviously for the Celtic hierarchy and the new manager to make a decision on. But yeah, I think in general, Celtic fans are just happy to see the back of this campaign and will be happy to see the back of several personnel who have been involved in it.
Yeah,
See, in terms of Kennedy, Simmy, sorry to interrupt.
Mm-hmm. No.
In terms of John Kennedy, I think if he looks back on this period of time in maybe a year's time, or if he does get fired by Celtic and he moves on somewhere else, I think he will look back on these. What was it? 6 games or 7? No, more than that. 9 games.
I think I'm going back to February, maybe
10. I think, yeah. So it was 4 wins, 4 draws, 2 defeats. So that's 10 games, right? So he's had 10 games in charge. I just think that he will look back on it with massive regrets because he didn't do anything different to what had been done before. Even take Saturday's game as an example. It is a complete and utter free hit. What was riding on that game? Hibs had no. Basically, Hibs had no interest in that game whatsoever because they wanted to protect as many of their players for next Saturday, quite understandably, as possible. Right? Celtic had an opportunity there. You've got guys like the young lad Montgomery who played during the week, and then you had Dembele. You're not telling me there isn't a number of young players who. Is that how lowly they rate the academy? That there is no one who they can just go, it's the final day of the season, mate. Like, here's an opportunity to go and play in the green and white hoops, something you probably dreamed of since you were a little kid. Go and play in a competitive game for Celtic. Yeah, there's no fans here, but still, go and play. Go and show us what you can do. No, he goes with the same tired and boring lineup that have let him and Neil Lennon and the rest of those players down time after time after time all season long. And did they try and do anything different in any of the games? I didn't see anything. I think tactically, the subs looked like the same subs that Neil Lennon were making. I just thought, you've had an opportunity here. It was a complete free hit. I'm not saying that if he had gone and done something remarkable, he would have got the job. But at least try. At least have a gamble and see what happens. By going into, you could have put anyone in charge of Celtic and just said, see what we've been doing for the last few months, just keep doing the same thing. Yeah, that's fine. What does John Kennedy's time in charge of Celtic as the top man, what does that actually tell us about John Kennedy as a manager going forward? Nothing. If I'm a chairman of maybe a League One club in England or maybe a Premiership club in Scotland, and you're looking for your next manager and you think, John Kennedy, he's got a good reputation as a coach. You look at that 10-game spell that he had with Celtic, and are you inspired by that at all? I'm not. I just think he'll look back on it in years to come, in my opinion, and he'll regret that he didn't at least try and do something different.
Another devoted servant of Celtic Football Club moving on is Scott Brown. It was quite fitting that his final game for Celtic was against his ex-club Hibs, wasn't it, Anthony?
I suppose it was, yeah. But, I mean...
I'm sorry to jump in here, but can we just address the point that Hibs gave him a commemorative plate or something?
I thought, that was a bit much.
He's not dying. He's moving to Aberdeen. He's moving to your rivals. What are you congratulating him for?
Quite a lot. I was quite surprised at how many media outlets were, fair enough, pay tribute to Scott Brown. He's been a fantastic player within Scottish football and for Celtic, but some of the media outlets were coming across as like Celtic fanzines in terms of the way they were portraying it. It was like, thank you, Scott Brown. It was as if it was from them.
I think it's so disrespectful to Aberdeen as well. Like, it's like he's going, he's not playing. He's not playing for one of the big boys anymore. He's going and playing for lowly Aberdeen. Like, come on, man. Yeah. He's moving to potentially the third or fourth biggest club in the country. He's not moving down to League Two to take up a position. You know what I mean? I just think it's so disrespectful. And I understand. See, from Celtic fans' point of view and from the club's media, not a problem with that whatsoever. Yep. He's been a massive servant to that club, and they can pay whatever tributes they want. But you're right in what you're saying in terms of any mainstream media that were talking like he was retiring, or like he was retiring completely, or was on his deathbed. It was embarrassing. Like, I just don't understand what goes through the Hibs hierarchy's mindset in saying, oh, well, this is his last game for Celtic. He'll be playing against us next season for Aberdeen, but what we'll do is we'll present him with a plate before the game. I mean, get a grip of yourselves, come on.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, 100% pay tribute to the guy, but there was too much sort of gushing in terms of thank you for doing this, as if he was representing everybody in Scottish football, which he obviously wasn't. Scott Brown, absolutely brilliant player within the context of Scottish football, but let's be honest, he polarises opinion. A lot of Scottish football fans don't like him, and that's largely because he's been so successful. I mean, absolute hats off to him in terms of the way he's played over the past, I'm not saying 15, 20 years since he broke through at Hibs, pretty much 2 decades ago near enough. He's been an absolutely brilliant in terms of not only his quality, but the amount of honours he's won with Celtic, and he won the League Cup with Hibs, if I remember rightly, and just his longevity. I've said before, that's one of the qualities I admire most in a footballer, an ability to do it for the long term, not just for 3 or 4 years, not just for 10 years, but he's been there for nearly 2 decades and he's still going strong. That, for me, phenomenal achievement, absolutely brilliant achievement. But you won't catch me thanking Scott Brown for his service to Scottish football. You just don't do that in terms of being an impartial sort of commentator or whatever you want to call it. I mean, Celtic fans, yes, pay tribute to him all you like, but there's no need for the rest of Scottish football to. I'd be more inclined to go through all this when he's actually retiring, as you say, because for all we know, he's still got another 2 or 3 years left of dominating midfields for Aberdeen. We don't know how it's going to pan out. I mean, I'd be surprised if he's able to keep Aberdeen right up there and competing for third place. We've said before, we think Aberdeen will probably struggle now that Derek McInnes is gone, but if anybody can help keep them at that level, then having Scott Brown, assuming he's still got the legs for it, in that midfield is probably going to give you as good a chance as anything of doing that. But I mean, yeah, a lot of it's been over the top, but in terms of his service to Celtic, phenomenal. Can't argue with any of it, really.
Yeah, no, I like this comment that's coming from Brown Warrior. Guaranteed his first 50-50 next season at Celtic Park, he goes in full-blooded. I think he will as well. I agree with that. I think that Scott Brown will give 100% for whatever badge he's wearing.
I agree with that. I don't think Scott Brown has got any. I mean, he loves Celtic. He loves the club for what they've given him and his family, the support that they gave him when he had all the issues with his sister passing away. And I think he will always have a love for the club, and he will always respect the supporters. But see, when he crosses that white line, the guy's a warrior. Like he'll go to battle with whoever's in front of him. Doesn't matter if they're wearing a green and white hoop jersey, a blue jersey, maroon jersey. Doesn't care. He'll just go and fight and scrap with whoever he's coming up against, which is again is a good sign of a good pro in terms of he won't let any circumstances go to his head or anything like that. So, I just thought it was laughable, some of the stuff that was happening over the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, obviously his first club Hibs here in Scottish Cup action this weekend. They take on St Johnstone in the Scottish Cup final. Anthony, are you still backing Hibs for it? Stephen, I know you said you were. Are you still sticking to your guns and thinking that Hibs are going to lift the silverware?
Me?
Yes.
I don't know. Did I say Hibs would win it? I don't know. Honestly, I can't call this game. I'm not nailing my colours to either mast on this one. I think if you absolutely pushed me, I would say Hibs on the basis that I just don't think after they didn't blow the League Cup because it wasn't theirs to lose. They didn't blow the League Cup or the Scottish Cup because for me, they were never. It wasn't like Celtic playing against 3 other teams that are vastly inferior to them. Hibs are slightly superior to all the teams they've played this season, but they're not vastly superior to the point where if Hibs played Hearts 10 times, they would probably win 6 and Hearts would probably win 4. If Hibs played St Johnstone 10 times, they'll probably win 5 games each. There's not a massive gulf between those two teams, between Hibs and Hearts or Hibs and St Johnstone, but the backlash Hibs got for not beating Hearts and St Johnstone was ferocious from their own fans and from outside, people saying, oh, Hibs have choked, Hibs have bottled it. For me, you'll always get criticism for losing a semi-final, regardless of who it's against. But for me, Hibs were over-criticised. The criticism they got was out of perspective. It was out of context. It suggested that they had blown it against they did blow it against a lower league team, if you're calling Hearts a lower league team. But I've said all season, there's not a massive gulf between Hibs and most of the rest of the Premiership. They're slightly better, they're slightly more consistent. That's all it is. They're not vastly superior. So if they get turned over 4-0 by St Johnstone on Saturday, it will not be a huge upset. But equally, if Hibs turn it on and win 4-0 against St Johnstone, it will not be a huge surprise either. It's one of those games, honestly, it could go either way. St Johnstone have won, I think, the last 3 games against Hibs, so they've got to fancy their chances. Hibs have had a really strong season in terms of the league and they've reached 2 semi-finals already and the final, so they have got to fancy themselves. I think just on the basis that Hibs have had those disappointments earlier in the season, I think they'll be so determined to just make up for that, whereas St Johnstone, in some ways, the pressure is slightly off because they've already won a trophy. And I just wonder if this COVID situation is going to have some sort of detrimental effect. It might not, but it can't be ideal preparing in the week of a cup final, not knowing how it's going to affect your team. Is it going to suddenly catch up with another key player or whatever? Yes, that could happen to Hibs as well, but the fact that COVID is already affecting St Johnstone, I don't think that's ideal. So if you absolutely push me, I would go for Hibs. But honestly, if it ends up 5-0 to St Johnstone, I will not be surprised. If it ends up 5-0 to Hibs, I'll not be surprised. If it goes to penalties, I will not be surprised. This game could go anyway.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting encounter. One of my friends said to me, Stephen, that have St Johnstone players actually got COVID, or is this a clever way of resting some key players for the Scottish Cup final?
Trust me, Simmy, nobody is bringing in Bobby's Laval on loan unless there's a dramatic, something's dramatically wrong in your camp. But I mean, yeah, if St Johnstone wanted to rest the players, they would just rest them. There's there's no rules against it. So, I don't know. I just think it's written in the stars for Hibs. I cannot see past them.
You're still backing them, mate.
Absolutely. See, going back to what Tony was saying there about Hibs, obviously them losing out those 2 semis and the sort of ferocious reaction that the Hibs fans had to that. To me, I've seen a bit of a sort of mentality change within Hibs fans and maybe as a club, that they've kind of, probably since 2016, since they actually went and got that monkey off their back and went and won that Scottish Cup. Before that, I mean, I'm just talking purely from as a Hearts fan's point of view and looking at it, the people, the Hibs fans I know and the family members I've got who are Hibs supporters, there seemed to be almost a resignation that Hibs were always going to be the bridesmaid. They were always maybe second best. I mean, they would always talk the talk when it came to Hearts versus Hibs stuff. But I think deep down, most Hibs fans would probably they would be loath to admit it, but they would probably accept that Hearts over the last 50 years have had a bit of a hex over them and beaten them more times than not. But I think since that 2016 season, there's been almost like an unspoken thing between the Hibs fans to go, we want to have a mentality of a big club now. We want to have a mentality of we should be going into these competitions expecting to win them. Things that Hearts and Aberdeen fans do with nothing to back it up, but go in and fully expect your team to win these things. And I actually respect the fact that the Hibs fans they know that they turn on their manager and things so quickly, but they have this sort of expectation level now within their own club to say, why should we not expect to be better than where we have been for the last 25 years? The fact that Hibs finished third for the first time in 16 years, is that right, Tony? 16?
Yep.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. That is ridiculous that a club of that size has not finished third. I mean, the best of the rest, that's the best you can expect in this country. They've not done that for 16 years. I mean, that sort of stuff just goes under the radar. I actually take my hat off to the Hibs support now for sort of saying, nah, we're not accepting this anymore. We should be a big club and we should be going and competing at the very least and get into these finals and get into lifting trophies. And fair play to them. I think that people will look at it and go, oh my God, they're turning on their manager so quickly. And I said this jokingly on Saturday. We had training for my football team and there's loads of Hibs boys in my team. And we were saying that if Hibs lose the final, there's a good chance Jack Ross gets sacked because the uproar would be so much. Like, the fans would go absolutely mental if they were losing another final again. And that's maybe not too far from the truth. I don't think Hibs would fire him, but there would be a lot of Hibs fans would be calling for his head.
Oh, yeah, if they lose, it'll be bottle job Ross and all that. That'll be the sort of narrative among a lot of Hibs fans.
But I just think that shows where the club, or where they want the club to be. They want the club to be at a stage where they will not accept second best anymore. They will not accept plucky little Hibs getting to a final and getting beat in the final again. That's just no. There seems to be a mentality change within Hibs, and I really respect that. But I mean, obviously, I hope that they fall flat on their face. That's my hope.
Yeah, I mean, obviously,
going off on a tangent. Sorry, I don't know if you were going to mention it, but I tweeted about this at the weekend. I can't believe that they're not starting Marciano in this game. I know Macy's played all the cup games. He played against Queen of the South and Stranraer, and he played against Dundee United. But now they're in a cup final. Like, I can't believe it. Looks, reading between the lines from Marciano's quotes at the weekend, that he started his last game and that he's been told that Macy will start the cup final. And as much as Macy's played all the cup games, understand generally if you have your cup keeper, he plays all the games. But Hibs are not a team like teams in Europe sometimes do it. They'll play a certain keeper. They'll maybe play their second or third choice in the English League Cup or whatever. But Hibs, for me, cannot afford to be taking risks with a goalkeeper. If they've got a goalkeeper who is superior to the one that starts on Saturday, that just shouldn't be happening in a cup final for me. It's not like Marciano's the guy who's just come into the club. He's been there for 5 years. I know he's leaving, but he's been there for 5 years. He's widely accepted to be one of the best goalkeepers they've had in the modern era. And here he is in potentially his last game for the club. He's given brilliant service in terms of length of time and quality. And now he's not going to start the biggest match of his whole time at Hibs because...
Here's the question, Tony, right? So see if this had been a completely different situation, that Hibs had gone out the cup, but the league situation had been different, and Hibs had been with a chance of catching Celtic for second place, potentially getting into the qualifiers for the Champions League, right? If they were going into such a big game at Easter Road or do you think they would have put Matt Macy in for a league game? Surely just because he's played in cup ties. Who have they actually played in the cup? They've not played anybody.
Queen of the South and Stranraer were the first two, and then Dundee United semi.
I mean,
the fact he played the semi is an indication that he was always going to play the final. But I just find that once you get to the final, it's such a big game, so much riding on it. Hibs have won it only once in 119 years. Chance to do it for a second time. I've not seen enough of Macy to know what calibre of goalkeeper he is. He's generally done pretty well in the games he's played. But Marciano, for 5 years, has been the number one. Every Hibs fan is gutted that he's leaving. He's still got a chance to play in what is the biggest game since the final in 2016. And you're choosing to put him on the bench. That, for me, is a flawed decision. It's a decision to be loyal to Matt Macy. It's not a decision to pick the best team for Hibernian in this cup final.
Here's another hypothetical for you. If Marciano changes his mind over the summer and goes, actually, I'm going to sign a new contract at Hibs. I've decided, I've had a look at the other teams that are looking at me and I'm not going. I'm just going to stay at Hibs. Who starts first day of the season next year for Hibs? I would put my house on being Marciano. Yeah. So why would you not play him in this game? As you say, the most important game of your season. It'll
be interesting to see the decision that Jack Ross goes with it. Like you say, live by the sword, die by the sword. As you say, Stephen, Hibs fans might call for his head if they aren't successful in lifting silverware. But we've talked about Hibs. It's time to give a few minutes to St Johnstone as well. They drew 0-0 at the weekend against Livingston, and St Johnstone manager Callum Davidson says clinching European football for next season is a magnificent achievement for the club. Avoiding defeat in their Premiership match against Livingston means that the Perth side are guaranteed at least a place in the UEFA Conference League. However, should they beat Hibs next weekend, in the Scottish Cup final, they would be in the Europa League playoffs. So, I mean, we have to reiterate, we know how good a season Callum Davidson had. He's got European football. He's already lifted one piece of silverware. If he goes on and he wins the Scottish Cup as well, Anthony, that's just going to be the icing on the cake, mate, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about the magnitude of the feat if they were to do that. I mean, it's already been a great season for St Johnstone, as you say, but 2 cups in the one season for any club out with the Old Firm is an absolutely phenomenal feat. I mean, I've not actually looked back to see when the last time it was done. I don't know if Aberdeen maybe did it in the 80s or around that period, but incredible feat. I mean, it's a big deal if Celtic or Rangers win 2 cups in a season, never mind St Johnstone. So it'll be an incredible, but equally, if Hibs do it and finish third, it's a massive achievement for them as well. So whoever wins this, I mean, regardless, Hibs and St Johnstone both had great seasons, regardless of what happens on Saturday, but they've got a chance to make it an absolutely sensational season for both of them.
Yeah, no, I look forward to discussing the outcome of that game next Monday on the Play On Scottish Football Show. If we look ahead to some fixtures that are taking place, got a lot of playoff games happening this week. Tonight, Edinburgh City, they take on Dumbarton. That's going to be kicking off. In fact, no, sorry, it is. Yes, it's going to be kicking off in about 3 minutes' time. Yeah, so that'll be interesting to see who wins that first leg. The first leg tomorrow as well is taking place between Airdrie and Greenock Morton. We've got the one that I really want to see as well happening on Tuesday. Kelty Hearts against Brecon City. The first leg, Stephen. I know you're desperate for Kelty Hearts. Aye. No fixtures on Wednesday night, but on Thursday we've got the first leg of Dundee against Kilmarnock and Dumbarton, the second leg of their game against Edinburgh City. On Friday it's Greenock Morton and Airdrie, and on Saturday, as we said, on Friday it's Greenock Morton and Airdrie, and on Saturday, as we've said, it's the Scottish Cup final, the big one, St Johnstone against Hibs, 2 o'clock kick-off. That'll be an amazing game. I think that's going to be a really good game. On Sunday, Brecon against Kelty, it's the reverse fixture of that one. Well back in Kelty, guys, yeah?
Yeah. I think Brecon will win it,
though.
Say that.
Over both legs or just that reverse
I
game?
think Brecon will survive. I don't know. No logic to it, but I've got a feeling Brecon will do it.
And next Monday.
8 penalties over 2 legs, that's what they'll get. Ken Ferguson with a wee brown envelope, just handing it to the ref.
And next Monday, we'll find out who's going to be playing in the top flight next week as Kilmarnock face Dundee. So make sure you stay tuned next Monday for the Play On Scottish Football Show, 6:30, same time, same place. Have a great week. I'm sure it's going to be an interesting week in football. Hopefully nothing on the talking point that we've discussed tonight, but we'll soon find out. On behalf of myself, Stephen Commons and Anthony Brown, thanks for watching, and we'll see you all same time next week for another episode of Play On the Scottish Football Show.